The voice came through the car speakers before I had a chance to hang up. I had just finished my weekly call with my son, Russell. Same as every Sunday evening, he'd ring around 6. We'd talk about the garden, the weather up in Karakari, whether the All Blacks had any hope left this season. Comfortable, easy conversation, the kind you don't think twice about. I was sitting in the driveway of my own home, engine still running, and I reached across to tap the end call button on the dashboard screen. That's when I heard her voice. My daughter-in-law, Simone, must have thought Russell had already hung up. She was in the next room, or maybe the hallway. I could hear the distance in her voice. That slightly hollow quality of someone speaking in a corridor. She wasn't whispering. She didn't think she needed to. "Don't stress about Dad," she said. "The tablets are doing what they're supposed to. Give it another few weeks and he'll sign whatever we put in front of him." I sat completely still. The engine was still running. The heater was still blowing warm air across my hands. Outside, the last of the evening light was fading behind the macrocarpa hedge, and the neighbor's cat was sitting on the fence post like it always does, watching nothing in particular. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 30 seconds ago. But nothing was the same. My name is Graham Sorensen. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the Waikato Regional Council, and before that I worked summers on my father's sheep station outside Cambridge. I have built things meant to last. I have read thousands of pages of technical specifications, contract documents, environmental assessments. I am not a man who misunderstands what he hears. I heard every word. I sat in that car for a long time after the call dropped. Long enough for the cat to lose interest and disappear into the dark. Long enough for the porch light to come on automatically. I didn't move. I was trying to locate some part of myself that could explain what I'd just heard as a mistake, a misunderstanding, a joke I hadn't been in on. I am a methodical man. I don't like conclusions that haven't been earned by the evidence. But the evidence was sitting right there in the front seat beside me, as plain as anything I'd ever read in a contract clause. Let me go back. Because this story doesn't begin in a driveway on a Sunday evening in autumn. It begins about 14 months earlier, when my wife of 38 years, Patricia, passed away. She went quickly in the end. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that gives you almost no warning and very little time. We had 8 months from diagnosis to the day I sat beside her bed at Waikato Hospital and held her hand while she went. 8 months is not long enough, but I have since learned that there is no length of time that would have felt long enough. She was the steadiest person I have ever known. She kept the house, raised our son, ran the finances, remembered everyone's birthdays. When she went, I lost not just my wife, but the entire organizational structure of my daily life. Russell flew up from Wellington the day after she passed. He and Simone stayed for the funeral, helped me sort through the immediate paperwork, made sure I was eating. I was grateful. I was in no condition to object to anything, and I had no reason to. It was Simone who first suggested they move in. "You shouldn't be rattling around in this big place on your own," she said. She had a way of framing things as concern that I found difficult to argue with. "Russell can work remotely half the time now. We could be here with you. Keep an eye on things." Russell looked at me with that expression he's had since he was about 12, slightly hopeful, slightly apologetic, as if he was asking for something he wasn't sure he deserved. Of course I said yes. He was my son. I missed him, and the house did feel enormous and silent in a way I hadn't been prepared for. They moved in 6 weeks after Patricia's funeral. At first, everything was fine. Better than fine. It was good to have voices in the house again, footsteps in the hallway, someone else cooking dinner a few nights a week. Simone was organized in the way that Patricia had been, though the warmth underneath it was different, more efficient, less easy. She restocked the pantry, set up a meal schedule, took over the grocery ordering. Russell fixed the gate latch I'd been ignoring for 2 years and repainted the back fence. I thought, more than once, that Patricia would have been pleased. The first thing I noticed was the tiredness. About 2 months in, I started sleeping more than usual. Not dramatically, I didn't raise the alarm even to myself. I put it down to grief, which my GP had warned me could manifest in unexpected ways. But it was a particular kind of tiredness, thick and foggy, the sort that doesn't lift after a good night's sleep. I'd wake at 7 feeling as though I hadn't slept at all. I'd lose the thread of what I was doing mid-task. I misplaced my reading glasses twice in 1 week, then found them both times in places I would never normally put them. Simone noticed. She was always nearby when it happened. "Are you all right, Dad?" she'd say. And there was something in the emphasis she put on "all right" that I couldn't quite read. A tiny fraction of a beat too long. I told myself I was imagining it. She started bringing me a cup of tea every evening. Chamomile, she said, because she'd read it was good for grief and sleep. She was very consistent about it. If I forgot to drink it, she'd remind me. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I thought she was being kind. And for months, I think about that tea now, and my jaw tightens in a way I can't fully control. The fogginess continued. I started writing more things down because I was second-guessing my own memory, which was something I'd never done before. I mentioned it to my GP, Dr. Anand, at a checkup in July. He ran some basic cognitive assessments, looked thoughtful, said it was worth monitoring, but that grief and disrupted sleep were the most likely culprits. He adjusted my blood pressure medication slightly and asked me to come back in 3 months. About a week after that appointment, Russell sat down with me at the kitchen table with what I can only describe as a prepared expression. Simone was standing near the bench, tidying things that didn't need tidying. He said they'd been thinking about the house. "The house is mine, and Patricia's before that. It's on a half-acre section in Tamahir. 4 bedrooms, a double garage, the kind of property that has appreciated considerably over the past 30 years. Patricia and I bought it in 1991 for a figure that seems almost fictional now. Russell grew up here. It is the only significant asset I have," he said, and he was careful with his words. Russell is always careful with his words that it might make sense to formalize the arrangement, to put the house into a family trust. "For tax purposes," he said, to make sure everything was clear when the time came. I remember feeling a mild alarm that I was too tired to fully honor. I said I'd think about it. He nodded. Simone, still at the bench, said nothing. I did not think about it clearly because I was not thinking clearly about anything. That is the part that I find hardest to sit with. The weeks after that conversation are blurry to me even now. I remember Simone showing me some documents she said were just preliminary drafts, nothing urgent. I remember Russell saying a solicitor friend of his had looked them over, and they were standard. I remember my own handwriting on a page I didn't fully read, and then telling myself I was being unnecessarily suspicious of my own family. I did not sign anything. I want to make that clear. Something stopped me, some last stubborn instinct that I am grateful for every day. I said I wanted to take the documents to my own solicitor first. Russell said, "Of course, absolutely. Take all the time I needed." Simone smiled. But the tea kept coming, every evening. And the fog stayed. I found the tablets by accident. It was a Tuesday afternoon in mid-August. Russell was in Wellington for a few days, and Simone had gone to pick up groceries. I was looking for the extra phone charger I kept in the kitchen drawer, the one Patricia had always called the junk drawer, because it held everything from rubber bands to old batteries to the instruction manuals for appliances we no longer owned. I was rummaging past the usual clutter when my hand hit something at the back that felt deliberately placed. A small glass jar, no label. Inside it, white tablets, round, no markings. I stood at the bench for a long time, holding that jar, trying to understand what I was looking at. I put it back exactly where I found it. I wrote down the date and a description of what I'd seen in the small notebook I'd started keeping because of my memory issues. Then I went to sit in the lounge and stare at the macrocarpa hedge and think about everything all at once. That was the first time I genuinely considered that something was being done to me deliberately. Before that, I had noticed things, the tiredness, the fog, the carefully worded conversations about the house. But I had assembled them in the way you do when you trust the people around you, which is to say, I had arranged them to make sense within a story where everyone had good intentions. That story no longer held. I want to tell you how frightening that is. Not the dramatic movie-style fright of a sudden shock, but the slow, vertiginous fright of realizing that the ground you thought you were standing on has been hollow for some time. I was 66 years old, recently widowed, living in my own home, and I had just found evidence that someone close to me had been deliberately impairing my cognition so that I would sign over the most significant thing I owned. I am an engineer. I needed more data before I could act. I stopped drinking the tea that night. I told Simone I'd read that chamomile could interfere with my blood pressure medication, and I wanted to be cautious. I watched her face. There was a flicker of something quickly smoothed over, quickly replaced with concern. She said, of course, she hadn't thought of that. She was sorry. Over the next 10 days, the fog began to lift. It was not dramatic. It was gradual. The way the sky lightens before the actual sunrise. You don't notice the exact moment it changes. You just look up and realize it's lighter than it was. My concentration returned. I slept better and woke feeling rested for the first time in months. I found my reading glasses in the correct place. I read an entire article in the New Zealand Herald without losing the thread once. I understood then what had been taken from me, and for how long. I said nothing to Russell or Simone. I went about my days as I had before, slightly foggy seeming, a little slow, making the odd mistake with my words, putting things down in the wrong places. I had been performing confusion without realizing it for months. Now I performed it with intention. I rang my solicitor, Margaret Tuhug, from my car with the windows up. I had used Margaret for all our property and estate matters since 2008. She is direct and thorough, which is exactly what you want. I told her everything, the tablets, the documents I'd been asked to sign, the timeline, the conversations. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Graham, don't sign anything, don't move anything, and come in on Thursday." I went to see Dr. Anand the following morning. I didn't tell him about the tablets, not yet. I told him I was feeling better and asked whether the cognitive assessments we'd discussed could be run more formally. He was pleased. We scheduled them for the following week. I wanted documentation of my full cognitive function, dated, signed, unimpeachable. I also bought a small digital recorder from the warehouse in Hamilton. I am not a man who has ever felt the need to record his own family. I am telling you that because I want you to understand how far past normal I had been pushed. What happened on that Sunday evening, the call I described at the beginning that came about 3 weeks into this period. I had already begun building the case quietly. I had the recorder. I had met twice more with Margaret. I had collected the jar from the junk drawer while wearing a pair of gardening gloves and placed it in a Ziploc bag, which I put in my car and then transferred to Margaret's keeping. She engaged a pharmacist associate of hers who agreed to test the contents informally. The results came back before the phone call did. Lorazepam, a benzodiazepine, used for anxiety and sedation, not prescribed to me by anyone, not available over the counter. In a concentration, the pharmacist said, consistent with having been dissolved into a liquid and consumed regularly over a period of months. I sat with that information for a day before I could do anything with it. I want to be honest about that. It is not a simple thing to learn that your son's wife has been sedating you without your knowledge or consent. It is not a simple thing to sit across the dinner table from people and eat the food they've cooked and know what you know and show them none of it. I am not made of stone. I cried, once, in my car, parked down the road from the house. Then I wiped my face and drove home. The Sunday phone call happened 4 days after I received the pharmacist's results. When I heard Simone's voice saying what she said, "Give it another few weeks, and he'll sign whatever we put in front of him," I felt something settle in me rather than shatter. The last gap in the evidence had been filled in. I had her voice. I had the date, the time, the context. I made a note of it in the car, immediately after, before I went inside. I went inside for dinner. I said the drive had been nice. I ate the meal. I said it was good. Russell told me about a project he was working on. Simone asked if I'd had a chance to look at the documents again. I said I was still working through them with my solicitor. Nothing to rush. She smiled. I smiled back. That, I think, was the hardest thing I have done in my adult life. The following week, Margaret lodged a formal complaint with the police on my behalf. A detective constable from the Hamilton station came to speak with me at Margaret's office. I did not want them at the house. I gave my statement. I provided the jar, the pharmacist's results, my medical records from the past year, and the dated notes from my recorder. Margaret provided copies of the documents I'd been asked to sign, and the preliminary trust structure Russell's contact had drafted. Margaret also arranged for a new will. The original will, made jointly with Patricia in 2014, had left the house and estate to Russell. The new will, drawn up and signed in the presence of 2 witnesses at Margaret's office, with a full cognitive assessment on file, confirming my capacity, directed the estate elsewhere to 3 charities Patricia had supported throughout her life, and a portion to my sister's children in Christchurch. Russell received nothing. I made that decision calmly and without anger. It was simply what the situation required. I was at home the evening Russell received a call from the detective. I watched his face change. I was sitting in my chair with the newspaper, which I had been reading perfectly clearly for several weeks by then. Simone came in from the kitchen when she heard his voice shift. She looked at me. I looked back at her. I don't know exactly what she saw in my face in that moment. I hope she saw clearly. They left the house that night. There were no raised voices. Not from me, at least. Russell tried, briefly, to tell me there had been a misunderstanding, that it wasn't what it looked like, that Simone had only been trying to help. I said nothing. There is nothing to say to that. Either a person understands the weight of what they've done, or they don't. And my telling them will not be the thing that decides it. The matter is before the courts now. I've been advised not to say more than that. What I can tell you is this. I am 67 years old, and I live alone in my house in Tamahir, which is mine, with my name on the title in a way that will not be changed without my full knowledge and freely given consent. The junk drawer has been emptied and reorganized. I see Dr. Anand every 3 months. I have lunch with Margaret occasionally, because she is good company, and I owe her something I can never adequately repay. My son and I have not spoken since that evening. I think about Russell a great deal. I have tried to understand how a person you raised, a person you coached through rugby, and helped with university fees, and stood beside at his wedding, arrives at the point where he allows his father to be sedated for months, so that a house can be taken from him. I don't have a satisfying answer. I suspect the answer involves a long sequence of small choices, each one a little further from the person he might have been, until the distance became so great he could no longer see where he'd started. That is not an excuse. But it is what I think about in the evenings, when the house is quiet and I am drinking my tea, proper tea now, made myself, watched at every stage. I'm telling this story because I am not the first person it has happened to, and I will not be the last. There are people listening to this who have an elderly parent at home, or who are themselves older and live with family, and who might recognize something in what I've described. The fog that doesn't lift, the tiredness that doesn't explain itself, the documents that appear with gentle urgency, the family member who is always nearby when you misplace something. Listen to that recognition. It is not disloyalty to pay attention. There are a few things I would say plainly to anyone in a similar situation. Your assets are yours, no matter how much you love someone, no matter how convenient it might be. You do not hand over legal control of your home or your estate because you are tired or grieving or being told it is simpler. You take those documents to your own solicitor, not someone suggested to you by the person presenting the documents, but someone you have chosen yourself. You take your time. A legitimate request will still be there after you've had independent advice. Your health is yours. If you are experiencing cognitive fog, confusion, unusual tiredness, especially if it is relatively sudden, please ask your doctor directly whether medications or substances could be a contributing factor. Do not assume it is only grief or age. Ask the question out loud. Write down what you observe and when. The notes I kept saved me. Your story is yours. If something feels wrong, it probably is. The people who love you do not need you to be confused to treat you well. Kindness that requires your diminishment is not kindness at all. Patricia used to say that the best thing about growing older was that you stopped being embarrassed by the things that actually mattered. She was right. As she was about most things. I am not embarrassed to have been deceived. I am not embarrassed to have grieved so hard that I stopped seeing clearly for a time. I am not embarrassed to tell this story. What happened to me was not a failure of my intelligence or my character. It was a deliberate act carried out by people who calculated that I was vulnerable enough to exploit. They were wrong about one thing. They mistook my grief for permanent weakness. Grief is not permanent weakness. It is the price of love, and it does lift. And when it does, you are still yourself underneath it. I am still myself. The gate latch Russell fixed is still holding. The back fence still looks good with its fresh paint. The macrocarpa hedge still turns dark gold in the autumn light. The house is still mine, and I intend to keep it.